studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Nora Ephron died on Tuesday in New York from complications from leukemia. She was 71 years old. Nora got her start in the world of newspapers and soon became well known as an essayist. In the pages of Esquire and New York magazine, she established herself as one of America's funniest writers. Her humor was smart, self-deprecating, and perfectly timed. It is said that Ephron's true love became the movies, so she began to write scripts for film, and then she became a director. She is said to have reinvigorated the romantic comedy in her films, When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, and You've Got the Endings. They had real thoughts and desires and aspirations. In her later years, she wrote best-selling books that looked with typical candor and good humor at the process of aging. Ephron had a way of making us feel better about life's irritations and disappointments, not by pretending they did not matter, but by showing us how to laugh at them. Mike Nichols said of her, Nora was so funny and so interesting that you didn't notice that she was also necessary. She'll be missed by all of us and by her family, her sisters Delia, Amy, and Hallie, her sons Jacob and Max, and of course, her wonderful husband, Nick Pileggi. Many people are writing and speaking about this extraordinary woman today. There's so much that can be said of her that perhaps we should see her speaking for herself in her own inimitable way. So while we say goodbye to her in sadness, we remember and celebrate her this evening through the years she spent here at this table, talking about all the things that she loved. It is Nora in her own words. We start with her story, with her first appearance, right here at this table in 1992.
My mother was a screenwriter, and so was my father, and she just believed, first of all, I think she believed that when your kids came to you with horrible, nightmarish stories that you didn't want to deal with, one of the easiest ways to deflect them was to say everything is copy, because of course it's a way of getting rid of it and saying to your kids, someday you'll make this into a story. It's not exactly the way I operate as a mother, but I think that she taught us on some level what I think is the fundamental principle of humor, which is that if you slip on a banana peel, people laugh at you. Yeah. But if you tell people you slipped on a banana peel, it's your joke. Yeah. You're the hero of the joke. And, you know, I'm not sure it's the basis of humor, but I certainly know it's the basis of a certain strain of Jewish humor, which is to get up and say, you know what happened to me?
Yes.
You know what happened to me? And to take some nightmarish thing and to make it funny. I remember the first time I saw Woody Allen perform 100 years ago at some nightclub in New York, and he got up and all he talked about was how he had been rejected by one woman after another. Right. And by the time he was done, every woman in the audience wanted to go out with him.
Exactly. Did your mother have more influence on you than your father?
Well, it seems that way because she was so full of things that stayed with all of us. Those life lessons, those life lessons that Dottie gives out in the book and the movie. I mean, they are in the book, but my mother was full of life lessons that have stayed with us all forever.
And because she was a working mother, what did that do for you? How did that impact on you?
Well, I think, first of all, she was the only working mother in Beverly Hills who worked by choice. I think there was one other working mother, but she had to work because
working mother
she
meaning
was
someone who worked outside
divorced,
of home,
you know.
Right.
And we all grew up knowing that we were going to work, which not that many girls did in the
Nora said,
50s.
I'm going to have a career. It's just automatic.
Well, I
She
didn't say it. My mother said it. My mother said, well, what are you going to be?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, this was a question that we talked about all the time. It was never was the answer to that question, I'm going to get married and be a mom. We all knew that. Yeah. Sure, you did that, but what were you? Yeah.
What you're really going to be is you'll be defined by your work.
Yes, and it was important to figure out what that was going to be.
Here is the conventional wisdom. You could not wait to get out of Los Angeles. That Nora Ephron, the wittiest of 4 children, 2 screenwriters, that when
not necessarily the wittiest of 4 children, but go ahead.
Okay, some say that.
Yes.
Okay, but your sisters say that. I'm giving credit to them. Maybe it's not true.
All right,
okay. Anyway, you couldn't wait to come to the East Coast. I mean, what was that about?
Well, I was born in New York.
Right.
And I had been completely happy in New York till I was 5, when I was ripped out of New York City and plopped into Beverly Hills by my parents, who went out there to become screenwriters.
Right. And did.
And did. And the thing that is probably one of my earliest whole memories, a whole paragraph of memory, is of standing online at nursery school on Doheny Drive in Beverly Hills and looking around at all this incredibly beautiful sunshine and happy, laughing children and saying to myself, what am I doing here?
I don't belong here?
I knew it at the age of 5, and I thought, I'm in the wrong place, and I've got to get out of here. Now, I think a lot of kids have this growing up, by the way. I think a lot of people who end up in New York City are people who always felt this wherever they were growing up. I didn't feel it till I was suddenly in the wrong place, and I knew it was the wrong place.
Now, here we are at New York, a landmark. This city is you. You can't imagine, even though you spent a few years in Los Angeles, living anywhere else.
No. I think we all understand that New York is a series of little villages, that we all live in sort of 3 square blocks where we know the dry cleaner and the butcher and the guy who sells you the paper in the morning and the person at Starbucks and the florist. We did stuff in the movie where Meg buys flowers from a pregnant florist, and the next time she's at the florist, there's a sign in the window that says it's a girl. Now, of course, no one will notice that stuff but me, and now perhaps you.
Yes.
But we were trying to get across that thing that people simply don't get about New York, which is that you can live, you know, a kind of wonderful life in this city with children and dogs who are not unhappy.
Right.
And
it's not a cold faceless place, it's a place of community.
It really is, and these are, you know, you're a little urban family, and everybody has that. You see the same fathers and kids going to school in the morning, and mothers pushing their kids, and they grow up, and everyone knows, blah, blah, blah.
You then go to eventually to Wellesley,
Yeah.
all right? And when you're at Wellesley, you're writing letters back to your mother. Mm-hmm. And these letters become part of one of the plays that she wrote.
That they wrote.
They wrote,
Parents, yes.
Henry and
right.
Phoebe.
They wrote a play called Take Her, She's Mine.
And what did that do to you, and what did you think about that?
Well, you see, it was a play about a Southern California family whose daughter goes to an Eastern women's college. At the time, they were called girls' colleges.
Yes, they were.
And
no men were allowed.
It was frankly a big nothing because...
It didn't bother you?
No, because we had grown up with all this stuff. We had grown up with my mother saying everything is copy. You know, my sister Delia got her head stuck between the banister railings at our house when she was about 7 years old, and the police had to come and cut the wrought iron and get her out of it. And a year later, Natalie Wood, who was about, well, I guess she was a couple of years older, had the same thing happen to her in The Jackpot, which was a movie my parents, you know, and
everything is copy.
Everything is copy, and nothing goes to waste. It's an early lesson in biodegradable things, and so we were very used to this, and the play was very harmless. I mean, it wasn't. I didn't think it was me. I just thought it was based on something that had happened.
You graduate from Wellesley College and you want to live in New York. You come to Manhattan. You get a job as a researcher for Newsweek magazine?
Mail girl.
Mail girl.
Mail girl, yeah.
What does a mail girl do?
Just what it sounds like. Delivers the mail.
You take the mail around to the people?
There were no mail boys, actually,
Is
but
that right?
there were mail girls.
Because mailroom is where a lot of people like Barry Dillon or others started at these agencies.
At the agencies, yes, where there were no mail girls, by the way, because that was if you were a male boy at an agency, you would eventually become an agent. If you were a male girl at Newsweek, nothing ever really happened to you, except that you kind of continued to serve men forever. First, you were a male girl.
Yes.
And
then you were
Then
what?
you were a clipper, which was a tragically horrible job, where you sat with a ripstick and a grease pencil and chopped up 50 or 60 American newspapers and routed them to the department that your college education had sort of prepared you to think was the right place for it. So if they discovered a cure for cancer in Baltimore, you sent it to the medicine department. And
we need these here.
And then I became a researcher, another job that was held only by women.
Yeah.
And that meant that the men would write the stories and then you would check them.
And at some point along this road, there was a strike, a New York newspaper strike.
Right.
And they get somebody to do a parody. Was it Winchell or Leonard Lyons' column?
Leonard Lyons. Victor Navasky was the editor of Monocle magazine.
Right.
A short-lived but legendary
Later to
humor
become the editor of
magazine.
Nation magazine.
And Victor got some money to put out parodies of the New York Post and the New York Daily News.
Because they weren't being published.
They weren't being published. This was way before anyone knew what these parodies were. So when they actually came out, they were a giant disaster because people thought that the strike was over and put down the 10 cents or something that it cost to buy a Post. But of course, our papers were trying to be sold for considerably more than that so we could get some money. The point is, no one read these parodies except the staff of the newspaper.
Right.
And the editors of the New York Post read it and wanted to sue. And the owner of the Post,
Infamous Dorothy Schiff,
said, don't be ridiculous.
Hire
if they
her.
can parody the Post, they can write for it. Hire them.
Yeah.
And that's how I got
So-
a tryout at the New York
and
Post.
so you're now writing, and you're now a reporter.
Yes.
I mean, this must have been a happy time, huh? I mean, this is what...
Oh, no, it was bliss.
Why did you grow tired of journalism?
Well, I don't think I grew tired of journalism, but, I mean, I'd never made a decision that I was going to leave journalism. But when I had my first child, I had just started to write movies. And I thought, well, I can't go on doing journalism because I have a baby and I can't go and do these long reporting pieces that I was doing in Esquire. And I was writing columns, and they all required sometimes a week, a month of going away and reporting a story. I couldn't see how I would do that. So I thought, well, I'll just go on writing movies for a while, and then I'll get back to my real work. But then I had a movie made.
What was that?
Silkwood.
Oh, Silk was the first one.
And, you know, once you have a movie made, you're in big trouble because you don't want to go back to anything that
Why?
isn't as much fun.
It's because it's that much fun.
Well, it's so interesting. And also, I knew I was, however old I was, 39 or 40 or something, some horrible age like that I thought was so old. But the point is,
A mere so many years ago.
however old I was at the time, I was suddenly watching something that I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
And on a set that Mike Nichols was the director.
And Meryl Streep is the actress.
And
Cher.
I was riveted. There are people who say, oh, being on a movie set is really boring, but it isn't boring if you're engaged in some way. And I was riveted by what they were doing. I'd never seen it done. Really, I'd never sat there day after day, and I'd never watched somebody work with actors as Mike does. So I didn't want to go back.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was bound, but now I'm free.
Then came the marriage to Carl Bernstein and the breakup of
Well,
that.
not that fast, but,
Okay,
but
well,
go on
there was
with
a
your
first
story.
marriage. All
yes.
right, there's a first
Yes.
marriage. We've only got so much
Yes.
time, and this is an incredible life we're
Yes.
talking about. There's a first marriage and a divorce, and then you fall in love with Carl, and the two of you get married. And then it turns out that the world now knows that Carl was having an affair, and it was. Why were you the last person to know?
Oh, I wasn't the last
You
person
did.
to know.
There was somebody that knew.
No, I believe I was about the second or third person to know, but it doesn't matter.
And what did it do? I mean, but you stayed in it.
No, I didn't.
As soon as you knew, you were out of there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Then you wrote Heartburn.
Mm-hmm.
And here is the first example, or another example, of taking this terrible thing that was done to you. A well-known writer.
I was a writer and I was an essayist, and I had been writing, you know, at Esquire about myself. So it wasn't the first time that I
on subjects
did
like
this.
flat
but
breast.
You know,
and,
exactly.
Right.
But you know, when something like this happens, you do know that it's going to be a story someday. I mean, if you can just stop crying and find a way to write it.
You
if you
do
can
know
find,
if you're Nora Ephron.
Well, I think that a lot of people know, because you can't believe the number of letters I have gotten since that book was published of people who also know they have a story. They don't quite know that the story should be funny.
Yeah.
This, I have to say, I always knew that part of it. I always knew that if you did one of those, kinds of things, it wasn't going to work. But I went through. You go through something like that, which really did have its comical moments, and you kind of think to yourself, got to remember this, because someday it will be funny.
I know about you and Thelma Rice. I know everything. It's all here. You didn't even have the decency to hide the evidence. You just threw it in a drawer. Hotels, motels. You couldn't even pay cash. Like a normal philanderer, you charged everything. I mean, look at this flowers. Look at all these flowers that you bought for her. And you occasionally brought me home a bunch of wilted zinnias. How can you do this? If I'm such a bitch, then tell me. But don't do this. We have a baby, Mark. We have another baby coming. Don't you even care about them?
Of course I care.
Do you love her?
Does time heal all wounds from divorce?
I think it probably, I think what time does is it causes you to forget. And that's what it mostly does. And
it's a separation from the anger.
I don't think it's a question of wounds. I just think that divorce is tricky. It's constantly tricky. And it constantly throws up events that are tricky, like for example, the divorced bar mitzvah, which fortunately I never had to go through. But that sort of thing is interesting. You know, most of us lead quiet lives. Divorce is the drama. Falling in love is the first drama, and then getting divorced is the next drama. And that's about what we do. We don't, you know, have car chases or take part in sensational murders. We just,
is
that's
divorce
the
more
plot.
interesting than marriage?
Is probably.
Probably, because there's drama.
Well, falling
conflict.
in love is the most interesting because it's the most full of hope. Yeah. When I wrote When Harry Met Sally, it was very clear to me that it was the kind of movie a first-time director could direct because there were no tanks going over mountains and so on and so on. It was a small
It's a little bit
movie.
like Diner for Barry Levinson.
Right.
You know.
But then when I saw the movie, I realized I couldn't have directed it at all. I thought Rob did a fantastic job directing that movie, and I was thrilled with it. I thought it came out great. And it was such a fantastic lesson, too, because, you know, when you start out as a screenwriter, you have an unbelievable rigidity about your lines, and when people change them, you go crazy. You go absolutely crazy. Well, when you make a movie with Rob and Andy Scheinman, the producer, and Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan, and they change your lines, it's usually better.
No, just let me speak to that because everybody would want me to ask this. The great scene about, you know, faking the orgasm.
Right.
You know, was that scripted by you?
Well, no.
You mean the best scene in this movie?
No, you see, what that was we had a scene about faking orgasms. We really did have this scene that we had all done. Me and Rob and Andy had done this scene that, you know, what happened with that movie was that we started out and I asked them about their lives as single men, and they told me all these horrible things that I always secretly knew, but I still had never heard anyone express them.
But you didn't tell us you knew, or what?
Well, no, things that you sort of know that men think, like things like, how long do I have to lie here and hold her before I can go home? Is 30 seconds enough, you know? So they said that sort of stuff to me, and
Women.
and I wrote it all down, and then I put it all into various moments in the movie, and then they said
You
to
are
me...
dangerous when people are around
Well,
you.
no, but they knew what
Yeah.
we were doing, and then they said to me, okay, we've told you some secrets about men.
Yeah.
Now tell us something we don't know about women. And I said, women fake orgasms. And they said,
Oh, come on.
they said, not with
With
me.
me.
Right? You know, they said, all women. I said, all women. They said, all the time. I said, at least once, everyone, I swear to you. So out of this conversation came this scene. Well, then we did it in a read-through, and Meg Ryan said, you know, what if I faked an orgasm while we were in the delicatessen having this conversation? So everyone said, great, do it. So she did it, and of course it was incredible. And then Billy said, you know what, there should be a customer who will say at the end of this, I'll have what she's having. And we said, great. And Rob said, my mother. So that was how that scene happened.
Oh, oh God. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Oh, oh, yes, yes, yes. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Oh, 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 God. Oh.
I'll have what she's having.
I know of too many movies where the
They hated
people
each other.
really didn't like each other. And the movie,
Came
I
across
mean,
great. Yeah.
What's
know-
the best example of that?
well, I will tell you, actually, since you asked, Charlie, that there's a scene in When Harry Met Sally that I think is one of the most... Every time I see this scene, it absolutely knocks me out. It's the first New Year's
Tom
Eve
didn't
scene.
like Meg?
No, this is Billy Crystal and
Billy,
Meg.
yeah.
It's the first New Year's Eve scene in the movie, and it is an absolutely great scene, and they are both great in it, and they weren't speaking.
They were having a little tiff on the set or something?
Yeah, they were. And and it's just great.
You gotta watch that scene.
So, and every time I see it, it's just, you know, it's that thing you also hear about directors who ran the most abusive sets imaginable, and then they made great movies. Right. And it doesn't really matter. It's just the way you would like it to be. And but the truth is that if the actors are good enough and if the script is good enough, you can probably have the appearance of chemistry without there having been any. And by the same, you know, you can have a huge amount of chemistry going on between the leads and not see a frame of it on film.
I really want to thank you for taking me out tonight.
Oh, don't be silly. And next New Year's Eve, if neither one of us is with anybody, you got a date.
Deal. See? Now we can dance cheek to cheek.
Is just to tell them that I love you a lot. Then the world discovers as my book ends how to make two lovers from friends. Hey everybody, 10 seconds to New Year's. 10.
Want to get some air?
You know, this movie, where two people, you know, he's in Seattle, she's in Baltimore, is a sort of very peculiar mixture of these two things, in that Meg Ryan hears Tom on the radio. She thinks he's her destiny. She does not wait for him to come to Baltimore and find her.
Good for her.
You know, she then does an enormous number of things to make that happen. What I kept saying to everyone until they were driven crazy from it was, this is not a movie about love, it's a movie about love in the movies. Of course, we want it to be a movie about love, but one of the main themes of it is what movies do to your brain. The expectations you get from going to all those movies we went to when we were growing up and thinking that that's what love was. I mean, I grew up thinking that you were supposed to meet someone and banter with them forever.
Yeah, be funny and wisecracking and
just
have
forever and
lacerating
ever.
wit.
And actually, I remembered this week, as I have had only 200 or 300 interviews about this movie, that I once...
Oh, then we won't talk about the movie. The heck with it.
No. That once I had a date with someone that I truly hated, and I went home from it and thought to myself, maybe we're going to get married, because I'd seen so many movies where the couple just hate one another at the beginning and then they live happily ever after. So, you know, anyway, that's part of what it's about.
So this is all unrealistic. This is just a...
Well, part of what we do in the movie is we hope we're going to become one of those movies that completely screw people up forever.
Yeah.
That is the dream here.
But tell me about love, though. I mean, is it unrealistic to think of love like Sam does in this film and like Annie does, that somehow there is magic and you can have that in your life? And
well, I don't know if it's unrealistic, but the truth is that I think people go back and forth their whole lives. They start out believing in this very pure, simple, stupid way about destiny and how there's one person out there and you're going to meet that person.
And that's stupid.
Well, maybe.
Well, is it stupid or not?
Well, I don't happen to, I mean, how could I possibly think? I can't make any sense of that. All I mean is that you kind of get a little more realistic and a little more cynical, and then things happen, and eventually, finally, after many mistakes that you thought were destiny, you find someone who was your destiny, and you say, oh, I see. I had to go through all the false destinies to get to the real destiny. You're constantly making up things to be destiny when in fact they probably aren't. But you know, the thing I've noticed is that you can ask a truly miserable couple how they met, and their nostalgia for what brought them together transforms their entire
It's like
beings.
Annie's mother talking about it.
Well, no, but they probably are a happy couple. But I think that everybody loves that story of what brought them together, and they make it, if not into destiny, they kind of fall in love with the little series of accidents, the sort of, what if I hadn't gone out to buy Band-Aids, you know?
To believe that there can be magic and that it can be the way it is in this movie, does that mean you're an unreconstructed romantic and therefore doomed to whatever?
Doomed to, I don't know what. No, I don't know. I don't think I'm an unreconstructed romantic. In fact, I now realize that, having read a couple of reviews, that I'm an ironic instead of a romantic.
And what's an ironic?
Well, it's somebody who is not romantic, but sort of is more interested in
Your sister, and how do you two write together? I mean, she start the sentence and you finish it? How does this teamwork work?
I will tell you quite honestly, I'm not sure. We sit in the same room, and there's a computer and a chair. And sometimes she sits in the chair, and sometimes I sit in the chair, and sometimes the other one sits on the couch.
Right.
And then we switch at a certain point, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. And we talk, we do very, very long outlines of of the movies we do. Very long, very detailed outlines, so that when we actually get to writing the script, it's kind of half written. And that's sort of it.
How are you different as writers? Same instincts, same sense of humor, same...
Delia says that we've become more similar as writers, and I think that's true, that we've kind of gotten things from the other as it's gone along. I know that when we started out, I had done more screenplays than she had, so I knew a little bit more about structure, but now it's pretty even on that count. As you get older, you really do remember nothing. You really have entire sections of your life that have floated away in some sort of never to be retrieved way. And every so often, you know, your friends say to you, oh, you know what you always say about something, and they tell you something you never said. You're pretty sure you never said. If you said it better than they're quoting it to you. People are constantly telling you about nights that you don't remember, and dinners that you don't think you ate.
But then somebody can say something, it'll trigger it. And it'll come
not really.
rushing back.
And you know what happens when you go see a movie you've seen before and it's completely new. It's completely shocking.
That's true, actually. And sometimes it's better than the ones that you had a choice to watch, which were new.
Yes.
Often it is that way. That you forgot your own sister.
Well, yes, I did, but it wasn't my fault.
Oh, really?
This is what you always say. I was in a mall, and a woman came toward me with her arms outstretched, and I thought,
who is that crazy woman?
Who's that pleasant-looking woman? I know her. I like her. If only I could get her name, and it was my sister. Yeah. And you could say, well, how did you know she was going to be in this mall, which was in Las Vegas? And the answer is I was meeting her in the mall. So then you always say to the person, you've changed your hair, or something like that. I was very upset when this happened, and I called up my sister Delia and said I didn't recognize Amy yesterday in the mall. And she said, oh, that happens to me with Amy, too. So Delia and I kind of decided it was Amy's fault.
She's humoring you.
Yes, she was, totally.
How do you like the idea of that you are the director and you are le général? You are in charge, and you can move these pieces. And if you don't like it this way, you can turn it like this. If you want to put these here like this, it works just fine, and it's your choice. And you know, if it doesn't work in the editing room, you can just throw it away.
Well, it's not that simple, but I do like it. I'll tell you the thing I like the most. I like that if it doesn't work, it's my fault. One of the worst things about being a screenwriter is sort of saying, don't look at me. He did it.
He, the director.
He took that perfect script that I gave him, and or she, or whatever. The point is that at least this way, I have no one to blame but me. And I really prefer that to passing the buck.
You became a director because you wanted to protect your own screenplays?
I think there were 4 or 5 reasons. One was that I think the most important reason was that every time you write a screenplay, you have to find someone to direct it. And the way you find someone to direct your work is to delude them into thinking that the movie that they're committing to is somehow autobiographical to them. And often to do that, you have to do a lot of changing of your movie so that they can find their way into it and give a year of their life to the project, 1.5 years, 2 years sometimes. There were things I was writing that I didn't want to push around for someone else. They already felt personal to me. So that was one of the most important things. You know, if you write about women at all, it's a very short list of people who want to make movies about women.
List of directors?
Yes, right. That's what I mean.
And even fewer studios.
Well, you can get a studio if you can get a good director, but it's just a very short list of people. The nightmare for screenwriters of finding the director. There are so many screenplays, and there are so many fewer directors than there are screenplays. So enticing one of them, hooking one of them into your project. So that was another thing. Another reason was that I was approaching what we call middle age. And
approaching middle age.
And it's tough for screenwriters when you turn 50.
See, let's get to that. The notion of directors screenwriters After they're in their 50s, it's not quite as easy because they're looking for new material,
Absolutely.
new ideas, whereas directors can live until they decide.
Well, not forever, but you have a longer
Well,
shelf life as a director, and so it seemed to me that I was protecting my ability to go on writing movies if I directed a few of them. So that was one of the main reasons. Well, then, of course, I did it, and just doing it became the reason to do it because I really did enjoy it. I really liked it, and I didn't even know what I was doing in the beginning. Now I'm starting to know what I'm doing, and I really like it.
Do you look at other movies and think, man, if I could do it that well, if I could, how does that person do that? How do they reach that whatever?
Oh, sure. But I'll tell you, you know, there's a moment in Goodfellas, for instance, to name a work of art that is so close to my own oeuvre. But there's a moment in Goodfellas when Robert De Niro turns from the bar and takes a drag of a cigarette, and you can see in his eyes that he's going to kill Henry Hill if he possibly can. And I saw that movie 5 or 6 times because my husband wrote it, and I just could never get over that moment. I could never get over it. And I had done one movie when I saw it. And then I saw a documentary about it.
The making of Goodfellas.
And how they did it was that shot is in bare slow motion so that you can't tell. And that's why you can see everything that's happening on his face. And I thought, oh, slow motion, that's a good idea. Do you know, I mean, I was such a babe when I started out doing this, but the point is that you do start figuring out, how can I get this to happen? Oh, I see, and it's something I used in Sleepless in Seattle, and I'm sure no one would ever connect those two movies in any way.
You did Slow.
Yeah.
With Tom being slow, so you see...
Well, Tom, when he first sees her in the airport when she comes to Seattle.
Something to me, and you said, I know I forgot to tell Nick. That's a great title. Do you agree?
Oh, well, I don't know that.
Why not?
I don't know that, but it's certainly the story of my life.
Well,
but I did forget to tell him.
Story of your life,
yes.
And that you always want to remember to tell Nick because
well,
he is your...
That, you know that weird thing where you're in the same house with someone and you think, I've got to stand up and go into the other room and mention this to the person I'm living with, and then other things happened. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
But you do that often? I mean, because he is your what? Your soulmate, your husband of 20 years? I know that.
Some number of years that we forget.
Yes.
20-something.
And he has given a new definition to what support means.
No, he just reminds us all that third time's the charm.
So there we were in China, just friends, having dinner. And it turned out to be Julia. It turned out to be Julia all along. Julia, you are the butter to my bread and the breath to my life. I love you, darling girl. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Some people suggest that Nick Pileggi, your fabulous husband, is part of him is in the character that Stanley plays.
Yeah, I might have been the person to suggest
maybe
that. There's
so.
no telling. Yes, who can remember? But I did say that. Yes, absolutely. Okay. One of the themes, and there's so many overlapping themes. I mean, this is really about love. It's really about marriage. It's really about a kind of marriage that actually exists. Thank God it does, or people would have accused me of making this up. But there are guys who really do take enormous pleasure in their wives' growth and change and all of those things. So that was one of the things I loved that it was about. I loved realizing about halfway through that I was writing a movie about marriage, and how rare it is that you get to do this kind of marriage, because movies require plot, but a marriage, a good marriage, requires the absence of plot. the last thing you want is for something to happen. You know, you do not want the thing that makes people walk out the door or you know, that's the normal movie about a marriage always has somebody walking out the door at the end of the second act of the movie. Well, they didn't really have that kind of marriage. These people were really together, and that was fun.
You said everything you've done in food all your life had prepared you to make this movie.
Well, I you know, it was so personal for me, even though it's the stories of two other women. I love food, as you know. I'm obsessed with food. I think about it constantly. And I had grown up. I had become a grown-up in New York cooking from Julia's cookbook. I had written a little bit about her once and gotten a letter from her. And so that part of the story was so personal. So I just loved working on it. Loved trying to figure out how you put those two pieces together.
And how many of the things in that book, the recipes, do you still prepare?
3.
They are?
They are lamb stew. They are boeuf bourguignon, which is one of the stars of this movie. And they are chicken breasts with cream and mushrooms and port.
And why
terrific.
Those 3, do you know?
Well, those are the ones
that you like,
know,
the food you like.
This is the thing with cookbooks, is that it usually 2 or 3 things. A cookbook you love, the cookbook that you say, I cook from it all the time, it means you've found 2 or 3 things you love in it.
It's so true.
You know?
It's so true. Yeah.
So,
other than memories, anything else wrong with getting older?
Other than anything else wrong?
Other than...
Is there anything right with getting older?
Wisdom?
Oh, wisdom when you can't remember anything is not quite there.
Oh, it's not that bad.
Having
what do you mean?
more time to read
come
when
on.
you can't
This is just comic fodder for you. It's not that bad.
No. I don't know, Charlie. I don't think it's better to be older. I don't.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
But I think that it doesn't have to be bad.
No, it doesn't have to be bad. And you have to know, but you have to know that at some point it will be.
Oh, sure.
And sooner rather than later. Which is why it's very important to eat your last meal before it actually comes up.
Tell that story as how you came to that conclusion.
Well,
I know what it was. Your
my
friend.
Good friend,
yeah,
my good friend who was
no
dying,
longer could eat a hot dog.
Well, she could no longer eat, and she said, I can't even have my last meal. I mean, that's what happens. I mean, but to be serious for a moment, as they say in the jokes, when you are actually going to have your last meal, you either will be too sick to have it, or you aren't going to know it's your last meal, and you could squander it on something like a tuna melt, and that would be ironic. So it's important. You know, we all play these games at dinner with friends where we go around the table and we say, this is what I would have for my last meal.
Exactly.
And I feel it's important to have that last meal at least once today, tomorrow, soon.
So what would you have as your last meal?
My last meal really is a Nate and Al's hot dog.
Oh, of course, you say that here.
Yeah.
But why? Just because it's the most
greatest
delicious thing you've ever eaten?
Hot dog. Well, you know, a hot dog is
a hot dog is a hot dog.
Especially if it's got the right bun, the right mustard,
You don't put sauerkraut on it, do you?
I have put sauerkraut on it.
Yeah, but
mostly
just
mustard.
And what kind of mustard
relish,
do you like?
Goldens.
Oh, Goldens, do you?
Yeah, I do.
Not some fancy French stuff for you.
No. No, not on a hot dog.
You seem to have this amazing ability to be able to adapt, to be able to find your way, to be able to, whatever the time is, Nora finds out where she fits.
Well, from your lips. But I do think, without being too, I don't know what, philosophical, because God forbid I should ever be philosophical, but I do think one of the lucky things about my life, and by the way, about a lot of women I know, is that we've sort of been able to make changes, take another path. You know, I always quote that great Yogi Berra line, if you see a fork in the road, take it.
Yes.
And everyone thinks it's you know, it's famous because it's so dumb. But the truth is it's very wise, especially when it comes to women, because I think you can kind of do that. You can sort of do two things at once, or one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. Women seem to have a slightly easier time doing that than men. I don't know why.
You call it fluidity.
Well, I don't know what I call it, but I do notice that a lot of the women who are older aren't doing what they did 20 or 30 years ago. And the men don't have quite the ability, partly because they're slightly more successful earlier and it's harder to get out of the success and the income or whatever. But women seem to have a way of, I think I'll try this, I think I'll try that, and I have been very lucky at it. But I also notice as I do it that I probably am doing it a little bit on purpose.
Nora gave a commencement speech to the Wellesley College class of 1996. She talked about how women of her generation weren't meant to have careers that mattered, or opinions, or lives. From what we have just seen, it's clear that she took no notice. Here is just a little of what she had to say on that day.
One of the hundreds of things I didn't know when I was sitting here so many years ago. You are not going to be you, fixed and immutable you forever. We have a game we play when we're waiting for tables in restaurants where you have to write the 5 things that describe you on a piece of paper. When I was your age, I would have put ambitious, Wellesley graduate, daughter, Democrat, single. 10 years later, not one of those 5 things turned up on my list. I was journalist, feminist, New Yorker, divorced, funny. Today, not one of those 5 things turns up on my list. Writer, director, mother, sister, happy. Whatever those 5 years are for you, whatever those 5 things are for you today, they won't make the list in 10 years. Not that you still won't be some of those things, but they won't be the 5 most important things about you, which is one of the most delicious things available to women, and more particularly to women than to men, I think. It's slightly easier for us to shift, to change our minds, to take another path. Yogi Berra, the former New York Yankee manager who made a specialty of saying things that were famously maladroit, quoted himself at a recent commencement speech he gave. "When you see a fork in the road," he said, "take it." Well, it's supposed to be a joke, but as somebody said in a movie I made, don't laugh, this is my life. This is the life many women get to lead. 2 paths diverge in a wood, and we get to take them both. It's another of the nicest things about being women. We can do that. Did I say it was hard? Yes. But let me say it again so that none of you can ever say the words, "Nobody said it was going to be hard." But it's also incredibly interesting, and you are very lucky to have an interesting life as a real option. Whatever you choose, however many roads you travel, I hope that you choose not to be a lady. I hope you will find some way to break the rules and make a little trouble out there. And I hope you'll choose to make some of that trouble on behalf of women. Thank you. Good luck. The first act of your life is over. Welcome to the best years of your lives.
The great thing about Nora Ephron at this table and at other tables and at other places was that she observed and thought and expressed in a way that made us laugh, made us cry, made us think about things in a way that we had not thought about before. She will not likely be replaced easily. Nora Ephron, dead at 71.